Assalamu alaikum, good evening. My name is Yusuf Ismail and the program you're watching is I Beg to Differ. For season 2 in 2019, we will be looking at some critical issues affecting us as South Africans. I Beg to Differ focuses on socio-economic, political, religious and cultural issues affecting us, and certainly looking at some of the trends in the global international community and its impact on society in general. Today we debate and unpack the whole issue of Muslim political participation and their role in making meaningful and effective change in South African society. Well, joining me in the studios, I'm joined by Rasul Snyman from the Democratic Federation of Khoisan People, and also joining me is Dr. Faisal Suleiman, a medical doctor and the chairperson of SAMNET, the South African Muslim Network. Welcome to both of you. It's good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Faisal, let me start off with you. Some months back, I think probably in November, December, SAMNET, the organization that you basically are chairing, sent out a particular survey to the Muslim community in order to establish and identify certain trends within the Muslim political community in relation to the upcoming 19 elections. What's the significance of this?
Yusuf, when we looked at in terms of research, we didn't find any previous surveys where there's actually hard data about what Muslims think, whether they've changed their minds, political trends. There's no real exit polling in South Africa, as we know, of significance. And most of what we say about Muslim voting patterns is more anecdotal, often guesswork. And we thought, obviously, with the view to the 2019 general elections, that it would be good to have some, hard data on what Muslims, first of all, think about the elections. We know up till recently there were certain theologians and maybe even theological bodies that were saying it's not permissible to vote. By and large, most, if not all, now say it is permissible to vote. Whether that is going to have an impact, whether that had an impact in the past on people not voting, and whether that would have an impact on perhaps a whole new breed of Muslims.
So you're saying the kind of theological so-called prohibitions based on supposed religious grounds prevented many Muslims from in fact participating in the political process?
Well, certainly some of those groupings have strong support, and I would imagine if
I would assume they would be in a minority in any event.
Again, it's anecdotal.
Because that's the point, because just I saw just about, I think probably a few days ago, you suggested something along the line that 65% of the Muslim community seem to lean their support towards the Ramaphosa administration. How did you come to that particular conclusion?
So from the 1,100 responses we've had today to the survey, the preliminary results of that show that we asked the question in the survey that have people's attitude towards the ANC changed vis-a-vis now that Cyril Ramaphosa is president of the ANC versus when Jacob Zuma was president of the ANC. In other words, had there not been a change? And 65% or 65.2% of the respondents said they are now more positive towards the ANC because Cyril Ramaphosa is there instead of Jacob Zuma.
Well, what was the position during the Zuma administration?
You see, we didn't have. So
you weren't able to determine.
So there's nothing to compare what Muslims thought previously. But of course, the good thing is now that we're starting to collect this data, and with the help of your viewers, we're hoping that more of them will fill it in, and until we close it off, we'll be able to, in a few years' time, when we do another survey, start to develop trends, start to see what are the changes in the thinking of some of the Muslim voters. We obviously know Muslims aren't homogenous, and therefore, you can't generalize for all Muslims.
Yeah, of course, it doesn't seem to be a kind of a consistent set political pattern. But before we unpack that, I just want to go through to the survey. So this is the actual survey that you would like people to fill in. Where do they access this? Because there seems to be some sort of circulation on WhatsApp group forums, albeit on selected individuals. How do people access this survey, and where do they fill this in?
It's extremely easy. The easiest is to go to the SAMNET website, www.samnet.co.za. There's a big link there that says take me to the survey. You click yes, no, there's a few drop-down questions, and that completes it, and it's over. For those who don't want to do it electronically, we're quite happy to email you this form, that the hard copy, or even to post it for that matter, and then naturally you do it manually and return it.
So it's your SAMNet website, www.samnet.co.za. They need to download this form, and then
if they want to do it the more difficult way of downloading it,
that means.
But if you click
can
on
do
the
it
link,
online, so this can be filled in online
off your mobile phone, your tablet.
I see.
Or your computer.
So just to clarify, and so the purpose of the survey, from what I can see here, obviously itemized here, to obtain the opinion of Muslims regarding their support in political parties, participation in the political process, and also to learn about the diversity of political thought amongst Muslims and the criteria used in terms of the decisions about the political parties that they want to choose. But in the broader ambit of in the context of South Africa, what do you aim to achieve in getting this data and obviously determining possibly certain political trends amongst certain groups of Muslims? Where would that, what's the next, is there kind of a trajectory that would eventually lead us to?
There's information there that'll be useful for even people like yourselves in the Muslim media. We've asked there, where do people source their information from about political parties, about voting? So we've asked, is it from mainstream media? Would it be from your Muslim radio and TV? Is it from the ulama? Is it from the Jummah, the masjid platform, the mimbar? So that is information that's useful for even for the alims. We've asked, again, a simple question, right? Would you like to see more politics discussed in the masjid?
Member. From your experience, from your experience on that point, what's the kind of level of politics? I'm going to get you, Rasul, just to broaden this up, but just conclude on that point. From what you have seen, and certainly your participation in the Muslim community and SAMNet being around for more than probably a decade, what do you see in terms of the level of political awareness amongst Muslims? I mean, not just amongst Muslims, but youth in general, for example. I mean, some few weeks back we had someone from the Student Representative Council, and even the youth, youngsters, seem to be depoliticized, contrast to, for example, what happened in the 80s and the 70s. What do you see in terms of participation? I think
if you take out some of the involvement of Muslims in the Fees Must Fall campaign 3 years ago, if you remove that, then one can safely say that since 1994 till now, really by and large, given the problems with generalization, but by and large, the Muslim youth have been apolitical. Emphasis have changed, priorities have changed. The MSAs on campus have really become just management of the Jamaat Khanas. They're no real...
Just purely administrators in the general sense.
Yeah, so there hasn't been. A little bit the students, the Fees Must Fall campaign saw some involvement from the Muslims on some of the campus, whether, as part of the SRCs or perhaps even marching and joining the general protests, etc. But other than that, I would... sadly, that I think, campuses, especially where people, your action, your interest is when you're young, you're on campus, you want to see more action. We haven't seen that. Lacking. Not just in South African politics.
In the global arena.
Even, when it comes to hosting debates or speakers from overseas, whether it's Palestine, whether what's going on in the Middle East, the campuses have basically been flat.
So it seems to be a trend. Rasul, I just want to bring you into this. Muslim public participation, or if people talk about the political will, it seems to me that by and large, and maybe this is just something limited to the South African context, the position in Europe amongst European Muslims and immigrants may be different, but within the South African social milieu, do you see, for example, this kind of parochial, inward-looking trend, even in relation to political establishment and political power, to the extent that the support of political parties is by and large garnered or geared around certain benefits that particular community may get in their own particular accord, totally excluding the community in relation to other aspects of society? Do you see that as a problem, and that has been a problem in recent years?
I think, Yusuf, I've just written an article called The Psychology of Defeat. I also wrote another article called The Psychology of the Oppressed. What happens is, when we talk politics, we have to talk politics juxtaposed against a background of consumerism, for example. Many of us have reached the point where we think we have gotten our liberation, and therefore we should celebrate it. But that's a disassociation from the true reality that exists. For example, right now we say we're free, but that freedom is not a a freedom that is enjoyed by someone in a shack, for example. Nor is it a freedom that is enjoyed by someone that goes to hospital and has a weak heart, for example. So the interpretations of freedom have been prostituted, so to say, contaminated.
Misappropriated in by and large.
And
by the ANC government and by
appropriated
many political parties.
and commodified by the ANC government. And why I say this is because success is deemed to be something material. For example, a new BMW. A minister driving down the road with blue lights flashing. That has become the measure of politics today. And I think that the problem is deeper than simply one looking at whether the youth are there or not, but whether society itself is conducive to clear and interactive, meaningful political engagement.
But that's the whole point, Rasul, because also, and I think we need to establish what we mean by political participation. Political participation, some may interpret as, for example, going and attending the 107th ANC anniversary, or, for example, going to the ballot box to basically put a vote. But that's not necessarily where political participation should be. It could be, for example, networking with, for example, groups like Ubashlali Basum Jondol, the Khoisan People's Movement, this kind of inclusivity, which is not necessarily limited to effectively just going to the box, putting a tick, or perhaps attending an ANC anniversary conference.
Well, one has to look at the psychology of the voter. One has to look at the psychology of society in its own, on its own. Society has been dumbed down. From 1994 to date, society has been dumbed down by the media, for one, by the rhetoric emanating from the political parties who are doing things contrary to the rhetoric. So I think the voter has to awaken and start measuring not words, but actions against words.
I just have to just stop you on that point, Rasul. We have to go for a quick ad break, and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back to I Beg to Differ. I'm your host, Yusuf Ismail, and today we're debating the whole issue of Muslim public participation in the political process. So just before we went for the break, I pointed out the issue that the kind of understanding, when we're talking about participation in the political process by Muslims or other communities for that matter, does this necessarily have to entail going to the ballot box? Does this have to entail, for example, attending meetings or becoming a member of a political party? Or could there be a more nuanced interpretation to that, in the sense that you can be politically active in terms of making meaningful, effective change without necessarily affiliating oneself or, for example, being a member or necessarily going to a ballot box?
I think, Yusuf, the question is, how does society define politics, for example? Politics governs you from the day you are born, where you are born, you know, whether you live or die, where you are buried. That's politics. Now, for many of us, we think politics is simply organizing around a party, for example, which is an essential part if one wants one's voice made, or one wants one's voice heard in politics, or one wants to engage decision-making in politics. However, there is the social politics, for example, that is economic, that is social. And this affects you throughout your life. So if one stands and fights against, let's say, corruption in the police services, that's a political act. If one can identify tenders that are going to the wrong person, that's a political act. So we haven't defined politics in its broadest level. Rather, we determine party politics or parliamentary politics to be the sum total of politics.
So what's the disconnect then in the Muslim community?
one has to look at religious communities as a whole, and then one has to look at the Muslim community in particular.
Well, the problem is that when you look at religious communities in general, the distinction, maybe albeit a subtle distinction, is that other religious communities, Christianity for example, Hinduism, Buddhism, in most instances many of these religious organizations or religion in general has in a sense become a handmaiden to secularism. In other words, there is no kind of, should I say, ethical conflict between the political process, for example, say in European or Asian society and Hinduism or Christianity for that particular matter. Whereas within the Islamic worldview, you have the entire ambit of there being a kind of a separate political trajectory, which somehow the other Muslims maybe rationally or somehow the other idealistically appeal to, which may necessitate them in probably having a warped relationship with political processes in the countries that they find themselves in.
I think one has to look at global trends, for example, in terms of how has religion impacted on politics and how has politics impacted on religion. For example, you had people like Maududi who had said, if you vote, for example, you are out the fold of Islam.
Although Maududi himself was extremely political. He formed the Jamaat-e-Islami and I mean very much instrumental in the political process in Pakistan, but not necessarily supporting, for example, the Jinnah-based parties or secular politics.
But doesn't that take us back to what constitutes politics?
I'm
conscious and subconscious politics?
Saying, Rasul, is that on one level, for example, there is, for example, an intellectual argument made, and I mean, we've had this discussion before with people like Imam al-Assi, that Islam, within the Islamic worldview, you've got a kind of you've got the potentiality for a far superior political system than the existing systems out there. And then on the other hand, there is this kind of childlike discourse within the Muslim community where, for example, I think Faisal alluded to on the break, where people just simply have this idea, no, we need to stay away from kufr politics in the same way we stay away from television or going to the cinema or going to the mall. So there's a kind of, it seems to me that there's two elements within the Muslim community.
Again, it talks about politics by default. An abstention is a vote, for example. If I don't go and vote at the polling stations, for example, I leave the dominant party in power because they go to the vote. So this idea that by being apolitical, you are not political, in fact, by being apolitical, you're political.
Let me bring you in, Faisal, on that point, because I think this is crucial. And your survey, for example, I see an article, you were interviewed by the Voice of the Cape, I think some few years back in 2016, but I mean obviously relevant here. And you pointed out the fact that despite the growing number of Muslim and Muslim organizations, there doesn't appear, at least from your perspective, to be an assertive political interest within the Muslim community of South Africa. And you pointed out the fact, quite rightly so, that Muslim community has not shown evidence of strong political will, particularly back then, the 2016 upcoming local elections. And of course, the argument can be made now in the upcoming 2019 elections. When we're speaking about political will, I just want to know, what is Samnet's position? Do we believe that as Muslims we should go to the ballot box and cast our vote? And because that then raises other dilemmas about the ethical makeup of the parties that you're voting for and so on and so forth. What's your stance? So what would be your perspective on that issue?
As a Muslim organization, we are guided, as all our Muslims,
by the Quran,
by the Quran.
Prophetic paradigm.
The prophetic mission was one of social justice, and the Quran repeatedly enjoins us to do good and forbid evil and stand up for evil, etc., etc. So as a Muslim organization, that is the founding principles by which you have to operate. So from my perspective, one is not mutually exclusive of the other. Social justice, whether in civil society, whether joining human rights movements, whether joining animal rights movements, is all part of what a Muslim society, a Muslim community should be in. we excel in social welfare, as we know,
throughout the world at least.
Absolutely. But beyond that, we seem to have hit, a sort of a glass ceiling beyond social welfare, relief, wealth, poverty alleviation, that sort of thing. And that is not, because Islam has said, that is actually contrary to what we should be doing. And therefore, it's not an either or. It doesn't mean if you say I'm part of civil society and I'm involved in political justice, I'm involved in animal rights, that's enough. I'm not happy with any of the political parties, so I can remain aloof. As Rasul pointed out, by remaining aloof, in fact, as we've said, you by default, that famous saying about evil triumphs when good men keep quiet, or women for that matter. So as the South African Muslim Network, what we've pointed out is that in terms of our political development after 1994, really the community has not invested resources, has not invested intellectual capital in terms of we've started 3 years ago specifically a bursary program just for people who want to do political science and journalism and media studies, because there's such a dearth of it.
The dearth of it.
Right?
I mean, the conventional trend is commerce, medicine,
absolutely.
law, something which is financially remunerative.
Yeah, and with the hope that, by promoting these careers and by promoting, the fact that, and look, at the end of the day, everybody has to put bread on the table. It's, cost of living is there. Everybody has to live. And today, if you're a poor doctor, you're not going to do well. If you're a poor of any profession, and if you're a good journalist, the world is your oyster. Today, you're just not writing, from your home for your local newspaper.
To a global audience.
You're writing to a global audience. You can multitask. There's different forms of media, etc. And so we're saying there are opportunities both to make an impact and, of course, to earn. At the end of the day, you want to be earning a living as well. So from our perspective, yes, I still think we still haven't progressed. We can debate as to why not. When we say political will, look, by and large, even if if the ulama say that it is not their job, or this is not something they've asked for, the fact of life on the ground is a significant part of the Muslim community takes its cue from what comes out of the mimbar or what is being said by the ulama. Even if they may not necessarily say, we haven't asked for it, we haven't said make us the people who choose the politics of the country. The fact is,
they've got a responsibility and duty.
Yeah, and society has given them that.
I want to go into that, the religious establishment, but just before we go into that, which is also an important aspect, 2019 elections, going to the ballot box, is Samnet's position that Muslims should go out and vote?
Absolutely.
Because here's the issue, and this is the point, is that certainly there is a conservative, ultra-orthodox element which very benignly believes that, no, you shouldn't, they'd give the same reason or rationale that they would say, for example, you cannot have a television in your home, would be the same kind of reason that you should not go and vote. Very, very limited, childlike, without any kind of political astuteness. But on the same level, there is, for example, another group which says that who are politically aware, indeed politically aware of the situation in the country, the fact that not going to the ballot box in itself can be a powerful message that is sent out to the political establishment. By virtue of the fact that, I mean, at a fundamental level, Faisal, is that if the apple is fundamentally rotten to the core, and that trajectory is just simply going to continue for the next 4 or 5 years, simply participating in that system by putting a tick on a piece of paper is not going to make significant change.
You see, it goes to more than that, and that's why I said nothing is exclusive. If you will involve in civil society, I do not think that in fact it shouldn't be stopping you from joining a political party, forming a political party for that matter. And I think as Muslims, nothing that should be good for Islam, and as an advocacy group, obviously our focus is on what is in the interest of Muslims. But nothing can be in the interest of Muslims that is bad for the interest of everybody else. Our fundamental purpose is
essentially the same
humanity.
thing. It's a humanity at large.
So for example, if there are let's say within the ruling party itself, if there are shining examples of Muslims, for example, who've been hardworking, dedicated, free of corruption, free of nepotism, what a beautiful example to be setting. Now the question is, can you make a difference within a system or within a party, whether it's the African National Congress or any other one, where the core of it is rotten? So does that say, okay, so we shouldn't be joining at branch levels, we shouldn't be pursuing agendas and being influential? You know, people must remember...
I'm just going to hold you. I'm going to have to go for a quick ad break, and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back to our Beg to Differ, and if you've just joined us, we are discussing the whole issue of Muslim participation in the political process. Faisal, just before we went for a break, you stated the fact, or alluded to the point, that nothing prevents you from becoming a... You still maintain that putting a vote is indeed something that is positive and something that you basically look... I mean, this takes us to a broader aspect that, in a general sense, and of course there may be honorable exceptions, systems, governments haven't actually been changed through the ballot. Even in the South African context, 24 years after democracy, as many people have pointed out, although at the very peripheral level you don't have the issue of blacks, non-blacks, whites here, places segmented for certain race groups, but the economic apartheid, which in fact underpinned the entire system, simply continued under another name.
Yeah, look, we can discuss, you know, it's a different debate about what the ANC has done as the ruling party. I mean, we look at India and how Congress ruled initially after independence, and that is the story of all liberation movements after independence, to the point where, you know, either the parties collapse or they you know, destroy, they implode. And in certain cases, I think what one looks around us is evidence of the ANC's failings. There are two questions then, Yusuf, that arise. The one is obviously the question of what is the value of your vote. The system we have is what we have. Unless you're changing the system, now of course there's an entire different question about proportional representation.
Does our vote have value? Right? That's the issue, because it leads us to the sense of frustration after elections.
You see, the one thing is, many South Africans, including ANC supporters or traditional ANC, are frustrated and disgusted and disappointed over what has transpired since 1994, but certainly, you know, in the last 10 years in particular. And, you know, I mean, Rasul, I'm sure, will say this entire ANC government has been one big sellout. So there are different levels of debate. But at the moment, this is the system we have. And politicians will go to that voters' roll come June, July, August, and they will look at the voters' roll and look at, you know, how many people. Of course, it doesn't tell them what each person voted for, but on the voters' roll, you've ticked off your name when you went to your polling booth, so you know who's, you know, how many people have voted. You look at the, you know, at what was the outcome of that ward or whatever it is, and politicians are able to gauge. And, you know, if I give a good example, you know, we often talk about the Jewish vote in New York, for example, that people know on voting day, even though the Jewish community is you know, it's not huge, if there are 1 million Jewish people eligible to vote, you're going to get 990,000 people coming out. But if there are 50 million, 10 million Hispanics, or whatever, African Americans, and only 100,000 are coming out to vote, that Jewish population of 2 million that can deliver, you know, 1.9 million votes, just you know, in that, is more valuable to a politician, because those are votes in the bag. 10 million Hispanics who ain't coming out to vote aren't putting that politician in parliament.
How do you determine that in the South African context? Because certainly from the IEC levels, and certainly counting the ballots, no determination can be made. I mean, if we're talking about voting based on religious principles and based on your religious background, no one can determine that this is a number of Muslim voters that have voted for
if I give you a let's take a simple example. If you take a suburb like Azadwal, which is 88% or 99, probably 98% Muslim or whatever it is, but certainly significantly a Muslim majority, or Roshni, or suburbs in Indonesia, or Sydenham, or Overport. And of course today we know that the borders have been a bit changed. You know, obviously the borders, some places the border, there's gerrymandering, I think, of borders. All politicians do that, of voting districts, etc. But if it comes out that, you know, the DA got 70% of the vote in Azadwal, then it's not too difficult to conclude, like has been with the DA in the Western Cape, that the vast majority of Muslims who did come out to vote
voted for the DA.
Voted for the DA, for example. Yet the ANC say, but you guys come to us when you have issues on Palestine.
Are you saying then the implications from that then, by extension, is that when it comes to policy and decision making, some of the other Muslims will get the bad end of the stick?
No, I'm saying politicians are self-serving people who are looking out what is their interest and
that's a crucial word, self-serving.
And who puts them in power. You know, we've seen it, whether it's been the social grant system, whether it's been handing out food parcels, not just the African National Congress, other parties have caught on to the food parcel thing as well. You know, that is the nature of politics. And
I just want to interrogate you because we're on the same point. The quote you made, this was in an interview you had, the Democratic Alliance, this was in relation to for example, who one should vote for. And the point you made is that opposition parties, you have asserted in the past, don't provide adequate recourse for the Muslim voter. And you gave the example of the Democratic Alliance. And the point you said, which is quite correct, the DA has not been free of scandals. We all remember the aeroplane ticket scam. Of course, the water scandal now, that basically happened in 2017, manipulation for funds. And your point was that for Muslims, the added problem of foreign policy. So in one sense, you are fed up with the ANC, but voting for the DA is voting for a party that is openly funded by Zionists. Are you saying then that Muslims should then take it upon themselves to go out and vote for the lesser evil?
Look, it's not our... I'm not going to go out and say vote for this particular party, because I think there are frustrations for all the parties at the moment.
I mean, even the Zionist issue, the ANC, for example, seems to be a case of talking left and walking right. There's clearly a relationship with the Israeli government, I mean, with the ANC government for more than a decade, and that's
absolutely very disappointing. Look, it wasn't so long ago that they tried to send the South African ambassador via the back door back to Israel after having this whole debate about the downgrade and the embassy and all of that. So I think to say that the ANC has not practiced what it preached as far as Palestine is concerned is a very fair comment. There is the question of realpolitik. You know, one could justify and say there are issues of realpolitik that we need to be considerate about. And I think, you know, we mustn't be so naive as to think that there are not ANC politicians in the Youth League, wherever, that do not see the financial benefits of a closer relationship with Israel. I mean, they clearly are there.
They clearly are there.
Right? And if you were, you know, someone wanting to grow up on a financial rung, really being close to the Palestinian struggle doesn't bring you any financial benefits. If anything, it probably holds you back. Right? So as I said, you know, Rasul alluded to it, you know, early on about consumerism and materialism. So, you know, people, you know, they work on different levels and have different motivations. Sure. I mean, we would not have thought that a senior ANC struggle stalwart right in the early days of the Mandela government say we didn't struggle to be poor. You know, that was already an indication 20 years ago, you know, of things to come.
So basically a kind of a illusion. But I just want to bring in you, and I'll get back to you, Faisal. Rasul, this is the point then made by Faisal, and I assume probably from Samnet, is that the position is that we should go out and vote. And one of the arguments maintained and presented was the fact that if you look at the demographic in certain areas and communities, voting trends in those particular locales would inevitably come decision making, have an impact on the respective community. What's your perspective and view on that issue?
I think from a global perspective, one has to look at the system in itself, because Faisal has been talking about systems. You've been talking about systems. And the world is tired of systems. It's now saying we should change the system, the entire system.
Can it be changed to the ballot box? That's what we want to know, because the system has to change.
It may or may not be.
Power is never given. Power is always taken historically, whether you look at the Iranian Revolution of 79, you look at the Weimar Republic, the rise of the Nazi Party, it's always been a position of change through force.
I always think of, what's her name, Goldman, I think Emma Goldman, who said, if voting changed anything, they would outlaw it, if it changed.
So what should we do then?
We have an option to revisit the system in itself and say, is it working for us? Because as society, global society, we have now gotten to the point where we've seen the collapse of countries, for example. We've also seen how democracy is not working for us, or the versions of democracy are not working. For example, representative democracy doesn't work.
So take it then to its final conclusion, take it to its logical conclusion. Are you saying, well, I mean, we've inherited the British parliamentary process, the Westminster system. That's what we have inherited. We say, take it to its. Are you saying do away with voting itself? How do you propose the alternative practically?
Well, for us, we've all got to stop as society and say, should we readjust the system? If you remember the rhetoric of the ANC, it was talking about the second revolution. Do you remember the second revolution? The second revolution was to get rid of parliamentary politics because it protected the politician from the people rather than the people from the politician. Now, elections is simply a case of electing the sheep, electing which wolf is going to eat them.
It's a kind of case of different sides of the same coin.
So even if you vote, you're voting to be poor. You're not voting to be wealthy. You're not voting for your dignity. You're not voting to be government, in a sense, or rather the state, because we haven't really looked at who is the state and who is government and what's the relationship between the two. Therefore, we use empty rhetoric like by the people, for the people, when in fact it's by the corporations, for the corporations.
Yes, so what are you saying we do away with? How do we do practically?
Civil disobedience.
By the masses.
The time has
come. So
come.
You're saying civil disobedience by the masses. I'm going to get to you, Russell. By the masses, not attending, are you saying not going to the ballot box? That won't happen.
You see, not necessarily not going to the ballot box, by overturning the system in itself.
How do you do that?
That would mean if all the citizens, for example, decided to put down their tools, if every taxi driver blocked every city, for example, if every water meter guy never fixed the pipes, for example, we're sitting with a
kind of anarcho-syndicalism. That's what you call it.
Anarchy is the only way that changes anything. But we have to look at what do we want, because anarchy for anarchy's sake is not going to help us. So humanity and society has now gotten to a point where they have to reconsider. If you remember, there was a statement saying another world is possible. It's now time for that other world to be configured, for that world to be designed, and it's time for us to look at the status quo and say, is it really working for us?
That means galvanizing millions of people for that purpose.
We've got to now start mobilizing. I think the people are angry.
You've got 100,000 people, sheep then, effectively, coming and supporting the establishment here, just outside a few. That's inherently problematic. But I have to come and stop. I want to bring you in. I'm going to bring you in to come and respond to Rasul. I have to go for an ad break. I'm just out of time. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to I Beg to Differ. This is the final segment, and with me in the studios are Rasul Snyman from the Democratic Federation of Khoisan Peoples and Dr. Faisal Suleiman. We've been debating for quite some time about the issue of Muslim public political participation in the process in the South African context. Rasul, just the point I was making, and I'm going to get to you, Faisal, because we've broadened the ambit of discussion from the initial survey that SAMNET has been circulating in terms of determining trends in the Muslim community. the point you made, Rasul, you're calling for the whole process of anarchy. From a practical, logistical point of view, is that even possible where after more than a decade of theft, thuggery, criminality of the worst kind, the ANC can still commandeer 100,000 people to fill a stadium?
One has to, you can't judge that by the numbers. You can fill a stadium with 1 million hungry people, for example, and people who are consumers, who are going to have fun. That's easy to fill. But are you filling the people with politically astute people? For example, there was the case of the political elite eating cake. And the poor masses were clapping hands.
Well, that analogy has been there from time immemorial, from the times of the kings and the monarchs.
Now, this was, for me, it sounded a clarion call that was saying, Marie Antoinette spoke wisely, and the results should be exactly the same. As people, we are now getting to the point where we're beginning to say, what's our future? We're now beginning to say that. We trusted the ANC. But the ANC has brought us to this point. We have bigger shack cities, for example. We have horrendous rape statistics.
Even mortality rates, I was quite surprised.
Exactly.
Mortality rates amongst black people are higher now than they have ever been, even during the heights of apartheid. More people are landless without homes now than they were during the heights of apartheid. Which raises the question then, I mean, is this, you know, they say systems generally are either overt dictatorships and covert dictatorships, and have we not basically evolved from an overt dictatorship which was open and there viewing people could see to a covert one?
Again, we're talking about a colonized narrative. For example, when we say we free, were we freed? That becomes the question. Now people are looking at even the icon Mandela and saying, did he sell us out or not? This was something that had never been asked before, but society is asking this. Decolonize education, decolonize politics, decolonize capital, for example. Now, when we say where we come from, one has to weigh up what was the revolution, what were we fighting, and one has to say, what did we win?
Cosmos Desmond is late now, pointed out that perhaps you should have needed some bloodshedding post 1994, pre 1994, which never happened. It never allowed the country to truly heal. But you know, going to what Rasul states, he speaks from the perspective of we need to get out of the system. Your perspective has been somewhat more nuanced in the sense that you are saying, look, the system is there, this is what we've got, let us try and work within the system and attempt to change.
I don't think, look, you know, if we use two contemporaneous examples, by all accounts, the present president of Tanzania has flipped the coin in terms of cutting expenditure, wastage, being on the ground, the sort of president one wants to see. The jury is still out on Imran Khan, and hopefully he stays alive long enough. But by all accounts, since he's winning the election and taking office, he's been trying again to fix a deeply corrupt, almost military state, right? So it's not without hope that you can get in. And of course, when Imran Khan started, as everybody knows, it was a laughing stock, you know, with these few children supporters, as they call them, the little kids who supported him. Who've now, of course, grown with him over 20 and 30, over to the point where they voted him into power. So, yes, we have huge failings. I do not think, again, that saying that that one should vote in the system stops you from being an active citizen. When we met President Ramaphosa, we were very strong on saying we want the strengthening of civil society, Chapter 9 institutions, all of the checks and balances. I'm not sure that I would be encouraging anarchy. I think there are diverse groups, not just in the Muslim community, in the social strata of South Africa. There's been a bourgeois black elite who are now also worried about their property values and everything else, who are going to be voting for a system that maintains that. It's human nature. But certainly one can cannot deny the fact that the disenfranchised, the lot of the poor, the vast majority of people there hasn't been the democratic dividend.
You see,
there hasn't been.
Someone like you can recognize that, but in the broader level, let's assume let's look at Muslim leadership itself. Muslim, not just the religious leadership, but even the business leadership in the Muslim community, those who are, for example, managers of industry. There always seems, and there has been since 1994, and I would argue even perhaps during the heights of apartheid, this kind of systematic acquiescence to power. I'll give you one example. I remember...
It's the nature of money.
But this is the point. You remember in 2009, you had the Chamber of Commerce, the Muslim Islamic Chamber of Commerce, I believe the Minara Chamber of Commerce, at the one of the major halls in Overport, I believe, just around here. Back then, it was just prior to the elections. You had an individual, a candidate known as Jacob Zuma. He had come through with scandals of rape. There were already, obviously, allegations of his involvement with the Sheikh trial that had happened in 2006, his involvement in the arms deals. The man had come with a problematic history. Yet you had that the doyens, and not, I mean, on the one hand you had certain religious leaders, but by and large, leaders within the Muslim community, mainstream business leaders, even people, Islamic organizations, hosted the man, gave him a welcome, and tacitly gave support to an individual who had a checkered background. Now, does this not also show, is this not an indictment on the Muslim community itself? That whenever it comes to, for example, participating in the political process, there's always a sense of wanting to bend over backwards, wanting to basically provide the fact that we are here, we have your loyalty, your trust, we're not going to critique you. And that was a classic prime example that we saw.
It's not just the Muslim community or business leaders within the Muslim community. It's been the nature of power and businessmen all over the world, and certainly in South Africa among all organizations, that when, and in fact, look, you know, now it's easy, but we should all remember that 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, to criticize the ANC from whatever quarter was tantamount to, you know, treason. And certainly, as Rasul said, you couldn't even in the first 10 or 15 years post-94 raise the question that Mandela was President Mandela was a sellout. I mean, it was unthinkable that you could even raise.
He was elevated to the level of sainthood.
Absolutely,
it's now that we see the
now you can ask these questions. So yes, one can retrospectively say, you know, at the moment the person had a cloud over his head, but at that time he is the president-elect virtually of the ANC and the president in waiting, and the nature of communities is then to say, you know, this is even now. I mean, look, I've been asked, you know, will setting up, for example, not that I'm advocating it, a Muslim party offend the ANC? I mean, there are people out there so scared. I'm not saying one needs one or a Muslim-backed party or whatever the name is, but they're so afraid of offending the ANC that they won't even consider it, even if they think it's right. Now, are we that afraid of offending the ANC, really? So, you know, we probably need to continue this debate in a different, you know, under different subjects. But I think it is the nature of power. And
you advocate forming Muslim political parties. That's something we haven't debated tonight.
I think there's a scope for a party based on social value and justice that does not have the baggage of the past.
The existing Muslim parties that did come about, I mean, in 1994, and then of course we had Al-Jama, were found wanting on many levels.
Yes. I think Al-Jama by and large sadly is imploding. The African Muslim Party never really took off. But of course the world has changed. Social media, nature of politics, the youth, things are not like they were in 1994. So, you know, of course now we've seen a whole flurry on the left, if you want to call those parties, you know, Mr. Maniez and Claudia Matsoneng.
These are kind of fanatic, lunatic fringe,
right?
Call that.
But yeah, so Is there a space? Yes. There's also, you know, we haven't even spoken about this huge constituency of Muslims who previously were told and believed that it was haram to vote, who now
suddenly have about
they haven't, but suddenly the leaders that told them have said now it's permissible to vote. There's this whole sway of 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, you know, if you take their families, people who've never voted, unvoted. What impact would they have if they all were convinced to come out and vote?
Last 20 seconds, if you want to basically, if there's something that you want to tell the Muslim community out there for 2019, obviously you've mentioned the ballot and the survey. What would that message be?
Fill in the SAMNet survey, go and register to vote at the next opportunity.
Fill in the SAMNet survey, going into your website and
clicking on it, and let us at least get some data, and more importantly, go register to vote. And we can decide about voting later on, but for right now, if you haven't, there's going to be an opportunity, one more huge opportunity to register to vote, and encourage your friends, family, use every opportunity to register to vote, and at least at the very least, at least complete the survey so we have some hard data.
Rasul, last 30 seconds.
I think one has to look at, the voter has to look at the system in itself and look at working towards changing the system from within and from without. Democracy works on challenging. Democracy doesn't work on acquiescence. Democracy doesn't work on silence. The person, the voter, the citizen must understand that they are the state and the government is merely an elected and paid servant that can be fired and the parliament dissolved.
I have to cut you up on that. Just gone a bit extended my time. That's all we have for this evening. The program you're watching is I Beg to Differ. And join us through 2019 as we navigate more hard-hitting issues. My name is Yusuf Ismail. The program you're watching is I Beg to Differ. And till next week, greetings of peace and good evening.